Before the world learned the meaning of silence, there was a kingdom called Aurelion. Aurelion was not merely a place on a map, it was a feeling. A kingdom kissed by sunlight, where the mornings smelled of fresh bread and orange blossoms, and evenings glowed gold beneath lantern-lit streets. Rivers curved gently like ribbons through emerald fields, and the palace, carved from white marble and crowned with silver spires, stood at the heart of it all like a promise that goodness could endure forever. King Arnold ruled with wisdom rather than fear. His voice was calm, his judgments fair, and his presence steady like the mountains that guarded Aurelion's borders. He believed a king's strength was measured not by power, but by the peace of his people. Queen Eleanor, his wife, was the light of the kingdom. Her beauty was quiet but undeniable, the kind that softened rooms and eased troubled hearts. She carried herself with grace, and when she spoke, even the restless listened. What few knew, what was guarded by generations of royal silence, was that Queen Eleanor possessed magic. Not dark magic, nor magic of conquest, but ancient good magic passed through the queens of Aurelion. Magic born of protection, sacrifice, and love. And then there was their daughter, Princess Ivy. She was 7 years old. Curious and bright-eyed, with laughter that rang through the palace halls like music. She loved hiding behind curtains, spinning in her mother's gowns, and curling up beside her father during council meetings, pretending to understand matters of state. Ivy believed the world was kind, because her world had always been. The royal family lived in peace, unaware that darkness was already moving toward them. Far beyond Aurelion's borders lived a woman whose heart had long been consumed by envy. Her name was Morvena. Morvena was a powerful sorceress, feared in whispered legends. She believed the throne of Aurelion should have been hers, that power wasted on kindness was an insult to magic itself. From the shadows, she watched the kingdom prosper, her bitterness growing with every tale of joy and unity. "They do not deserve what they have," she whispered into the dark. "But I do." The night Morvena invaded Aurelion, the sky darkened before the sun could set. A cold wind swept through the streets, extinguishing lanterns and silencing birds mid-song. Guards collapsed under unseen spells. Dark magic crept through the palace walls like smoke, heavy and suffocating. Queen Eleanor felt it first, her breath caught as she stood in the royal chambers, her hand tightening around the edge of the table. "She's here," she whispered. King Arnold reached for his sword. "Take Ivy. Hide her." There was no time to argue. Screams echoed through the palace as Eleanor grabbed Ivy's hand and ran. They passed familiar corridors now filled with fear, servants fleeing, guards falling. Eleanor led her daughter into a small chamber hidden behind the royal wing, an old room, rarely used. Inside stood a tall wardrobe, carved from ancient oak. Eleanor knelt before Ivy, her hands trembling as she cupped her daughter's face. "Listen to me, my heart," she whispered urgently. "What I am about to do will save your life, but it will curse you." Ivy's eyes filled with tears. Mama, I'm scared." "I know," Eleanor said softly, tears streaming down her face. "But you must survive. You must live. And one day, you must break this curse and save the kingdom." She began to whisper the spell, ancient words glowing faintly on her lips. Light wrapped around Ivy's small body, shimmering like glass and air. "You will be unseen," Eleanor said, "invisible to the world. And to break the curse you must." Footsteps echoed outside the chamber, heavy, approaching. Eleanor's eyes widened, Ivy inside. Quickly she whispered. She opened the wardrobe and guided Ivy in. As the spell completed, Ivy faded from sight, her hands, her gown, her tears disappearing into nothing. Before Eleanor could finish her sentence, the door burst open. Eleanor slammed the wardrobe shut and turned just as Morvena entered the room. Darkness curling around her like a living thing, the villain smiled. Queen Eleanor did not scream. She stood tall, shielding the empty space where her daughter had been only moments before. Ivy watched. She watched as Morvena raised her hand. She watched as dark magic struck. She watched as her mother fell. Ivy wanted to scream. The sound burned in her throat, but she clamped her hands over her mouth. Stepping back in shock, tears falling silently as her body shook. Morvena glanced around the room, her eyes narrowing. "Where is the child?" she hissed. She strode forward and yanked open the wardrobe. It was empty. Morvena stared into it, confused, then furious. She slammed it shut and turned away, convinced the princess had fled, or never been there at all. Invisible and shaking, Princess Ivy stood behind her, alive by dawn. The royal family of Aurelion was dead, all except one. Princess Ivy lived in the small chamber where her mother had hidden her. The room lay beneath the palace, quiet and forgotten, its stone walls cold and untouched by sunlight. It became Ivy's shelter, her secret, and her prison. She stayed there during the day, careful not to make noise, careful not to exist too loudly in a world that would punish her if it discovered her. When hunger came, she moved only at night. Ivy learned how to walk through the palace without a sound. She learned which corridors the guards avoided and which staircases creaked. In the kitchens, she took food slowly, lifting bread, fruit, and bowls of stew with steady hands. No one ever saw her, but they saw the food move. Servants whispered fearfully when plates shifted on their own, or when meals vanished from tables with no explanation. Some refused to work the night shift, claiming unseen hands brushed past them. Others swore they felt a presence watching from the shadows. Morvena, now queen, brought new servants to replace those who had fled or been taken. She ruled through cruelty. Those who disobeyed were beaten in the courtyard for all to see. Families were torn apart and forced into labor. Children were taken from their homes and made to scrub palace floors while soldiers laughed. Morvena demanded silence, obedience, and fear, and she received all three. The palace that once echoed with laughter now echoed with screams and chains, blood-stained stones that had once been polished white. Because so many had been killed within the palace walls, the servants began to talk. They said the dead had not left. They said the spirits of the slaughtered roamed the halls at night, moving objects, knocking on doors, breathing in empty rooms. When strange noises came from the small chamber in the basement, the one no one dared enter, they crossed themselves and hurried away. "The palace is haunted," they whispered. "The blood she spilled is hunting the palace." None of them knew the truth, that the sounds were made by a living child, that the food vanished because the princess was surviving, that the so-called ghost was Princess Ivy. Inside the hidden chamber, Ivy discovered what her mother had left behind. Ancient spellbooks Queen Eleanor's magic were stacked carefully against the wall. Their pages were thick with age, filled with symbols that shimmered faintly when touched. Ivy recognized the handwriting immediately. Her mother's. Ivy had the same gift. Alone and unseen, she began to learn. She studied the spells slowly, carefully, teaching herself how to control magic without drawing attention. She practiced late at night, whispering incantations under her breath, learning how to move objects gently, how to protect herself from dark magic, how to hide her presence even further. The magic answered her, quietly, patiently. The invisible princess did not seek attention, she did not seek revenge, yet she watched, she learned, she endured, and while Morvena ruled through fear above, beneath the palace walls, Princess Ivy was growing into something dangerous to a tyrant, hope. Morvena's hunger for power was never satisfied. After enslaving the kingdom's workers and servants, she turned her cruelty toward the youth of Aurelion. Soldiers were sent into villages at dawn, dragging young men and women, teenagers barely grown, from their homes. Mothers screamed, fathers begged. None were spared. "You will serve your queen," Morvena declared, her voice echoing across the square. "Or you will serve as an example, Those taken were forced into military training. Weakness was punished. Fear was encouraged. Loyalty was demanded at the edge of a blade. Many broke. Some disappeared. A few endured. Among them was Dylan. He was 19, tall and broad-shouldered, with quiet eyes that watched more than they spoke. He had been taken from his village without warning, a spear shoved into his hands, and orders barked into his ears. He learned quickly how to stand guard, how to obey, how not to ask questions. The palace became his prison, within its walls. Dylan heard the stories everyone else did. They warned him of a place no guard wanted to be assigned to, the Western Corridor, they whispered. That wing is cursed. People hear footsteps there. Doors open by themselves. No one volunteered for duty there. So they sent Dylan. He was new, unimportant, disposable. The Western Corridor was cold and dim, far from the grand halls. Torches burned low, shadows stretching unnaturally along the stone walls. At the end of the corridor stood an old, unmarked door sealed, ignored, feared. Behind that door was the small chamber. Princess Ivy waited until night. She needed food. Carefully she opened the chamber door, just enough to slip out. The hinges creaked softly, a sound she had tried many times to silence, but never could. Dylan stiffened. His hand flew to his spear. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice echoing down the corridor. No answer came. Ivy froze. She could not risk being discovered. Not yet. She saw him standing directly in her path, blocking the corridor she needed to pass through to reach the kitchens. Thinking quickly, she picked up a small stone from the floor and tossed it toward an iron sculpture at the side of the hall, hoping the noise would draw his attention away. The stone struck metal with a sharp clang. Dylan jumped back in alarm. His foot slipped. As he stumbled, his hand lashed out instinctively and closed tightly around something solid. Around her leg, Ivy gasped silently. Shock locking her body in place, Dylan froze. His fingers were gripping a leg. A real one. Warm, human, but there was no one there. His breath hitched. His grip tightened without meaning to. Ivy cried out, unable to hold back any longer. "You're hurting me." Dylan's blood ran cold. He looked down at his hand, still clutching an invisible limb, and staggered backward, releasing it as if burned. You spoke," he whispered. Ivy stepped back, heart pounding. Dylan stared at the empty space before him, his mind struggling to make sense of what he had just felt. He had touched someone, and yet he could see nothing at all. The haunted corridor fell silent, holding its breath, as the impossible stood between them. The Western Corridor was no longer just a place of rumors. It had revealed its secret. Dylan's heart was still racing when he finally found his voice. "Who are you?" he asked the empty corridor, his grip tightening around his spear. Are you a ghost?" There was no answer. Princess Ivy stood right in front of him, invisible, silent. She did not move toward him or away from him. She only watched. Trust did not come, Iseline, not after everything. Slowly, carefully, she stepped past him, her bare feet making almost no sound as she headed toward the kitchens. Dylan felt a strange chill as she passed, like the air itself had shifted. He turned slowly, staring down the corridor she had just walked through. His mind refused to settle. Is there really a ghost in this palace? But I touched her. Can you touch a ghost? And she spoke. The questions tangled in his head, unanswered and unsettling. Ivy returned not long after, carrying food she had taken quietly, the way she always did. As she reached the small chamber, she pushed the door open carefully, but the hinges betrayed her. Letting out their familiar creak, Dylan heard it. He turned sharply toward the sound. The door closed again. Dylan hesitated, then took a few cautious steps forward. Against every warning he had ever heard, he reached for the handle and opened the door himself. The room was silent, but it wasn't abandoned. The chamber was tidy, not perfectly clean, but lived in. A folded blanket, candles, books stacked neatly against the wall, a cup beside the bed. Dylan swallowed. "Hello?" he called. No answer. He stepped inside, his boots echoing softly on the stone floor. Is anyone here? He asked again, his voice lower now. Are you a ghost? Still nothing. He hesitated, then added quietly, I'm sorry for hurting your leg. I didn't mean to. I hope you're okay. Princess Ivy sat on the bed, invisible, perfectly still. She listened. Dylan stood there for a moment longer, then slowly lowered himself to sit on the edge of a wooden crate. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. I don't even know why I'm talking, he said to the empty room. Maybe I'm losing my mind. He laughed softly, without humor. They dragged me from my village, he continued. Said I had to serve the queen. I didn't have a choice. None of us did. His voice grew steadier as he spoke, as if the room itself were urging him on. I hate it here, he admitted. The things she makes us do, the things we see. Sometimes I feel like I'm going to break if I keep everything inside. He paused, glancing around, unsure why he felt so certain he wasn't alone, but it feels like someone's listening. Ivy's chest tightened. She was listening. When Dylan finally stood to leave, the room felt emptier than before. Ivy remained seated long after he was gone, her heart strangely lighter than it had been in years. The next night, Dylan returned. He came quietly, carrying a small loaf of bread and a flask of water. He placed them carefully on the crate, glancing around the room as if expecting someone to appear. I don't know if you're here, he said, clearing his throat, but I brought food. Just in case, Ivy stared at the bread. No one had ever brought her food before. From that night on, it became a routine. Dylan would finish his duties and make his way to the western corridor. He would open the chamber door, step inside, and talk. Sometimes about his day. Sometimes about his fears. Sometimes about nothing at all. He never demanded answers. He just spoke. This place is the only quiet one left, he said one evening. No orders, no shouting, just peace. To him, the room was a secret. To Ivy, it became something else entirely, a comfort. She listened to his stories of village life, of stolen moments of laughter during training, of the cruelty he witnessed and the guilt he carried. She learned the sound of his footsteps, the way his voice softened when he spoke honestly, and every time he left food behind, her gratitude grew. Her days were no longer empty. She began to look forward to nightfall. One evening, Dylan arrived at the small chamber later than usual. He looked tired. Dust clinging to his boots, his shoulders heavy from another long day of orders he did not believe in. Still, as always, he closed the door behind him and sat down like the room was waiting. He smiled to himself. You won't believe what I remembered today, he said, leaning back against the wall. When I was a kid, I tried to impress my crush by climbing the tallest tree in my village. I slipped and fell straight into a basket of drying peppers. He chuckled softly. My sister laughed so hard she cried. I couldn't sit properly for a week. Before he could stop himself, Princess Ivy laughed. The sound slipped out of her without warning light. Clear, real. Dylan froze, then slowly. His lips curved into a smile. Instead of fear, warmth filled his chest. He laughed too. So you're real, he said gently, laughing with her. I knew it. Ivy covered her mouth, then lowered her hands, her heart pounding. I'm sorry, she said softly. I didn't mean to laugh. I'm glad you did, Dylan replied. It's been a long time since someone laughed with me, encouraged. Ivy told him a funny story about herself, about how she once hid in the palace curtains and fell out during a royal meeting, landing at her father's feet. As she spoke, Dylan laughed openly, shaking his head. I can't believe that was you, he said. A princess causing trouble. There was a pause. Then Dylan asked quietly, What's your name? Ivy hesitated, but something told her it was time. My name is Ivy, she said. Princess Ivy of Aurelion. Dylan went completely still. The princess? He whispered. But everyone said you disappeared the night the royal family was killed. I didn't disappear, Ivy replied. My mother saved me. She told him everything. The invasion, the wardrobe, the spell. and how Queen Eleanor made her invisible before Morvena could find her. Dylan listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he asked, "Can the curse be broken?" "I don't know how," Ivy admitted, "but from the books I've read, true love's kiss can break any curse." Her voice faltered. "But who would ever fall in love with someone they can't see?" Dylan didn't answer right away. Then he said softly, "I can be your friend." Ivy smiled, unseen. "I promise I'll visit you every day," he continued. "You won't be alone anymore." And he kept that promise from that day on. Dylan didn't speak to an empty room. He spoke to her, he brought food, and they ate together, sitting side by side. Ivy guided his hands to where hers were, and when their fingers touched, she didn't pull away. She held his hand. For the first time in years, Princess Ivy felt human again, invisible, but no longer alone. One evening, Princess Ivy waited. She sat on her bed in the small chamber, knees drawn close, her heart light with anticipation. It was almost time for Dylan's familiar footsteps, time for his voice, time for the comfort she had grown used to. But the corridor stayed silent. Minutes passed. Then longer. Ivy frowned. Dylan was never late. Restlessness crept in. A quiet unease settled in her chest, tightening with every moment that stretched on without him. Finally, unable to wait any longer, she slipped out of her chamber and moved quickly through the palace halls. That was when she heard it. Two workers stood whispering urgently near the stairwell, their faces pale. "The Queen has decided," one sobbed. "No mercy," the other replied. "Dylan and the others will be executed." Ivy's breath caught. "They've locked them in the basement prison," the first worker continued. "There's nothing anyone can do." Ivy didn't wait to hear more. She ran. Down the stairs, through cold stone corridors, deeper into the palace where light barely reached. The prison lay beneath the palace like a wound that never healed. When she arrived, she saw them, Dylan and two other young soldiers, locked behind iron bars, bruised and exhausted, but alive. Two guards stood watch, spears in hand, laughing carelessly. Ivy raised her trembling hand. She whispered a spell. A soft shimmer rippled through the air, and the guards collapsed where they stood. Falling into a deep, unnatural sleep, inside the cell, Dylan and his friends froze. What just happened? One of them whispered. They watched in terror as the keys slowly lifted from the guard's pocket, floating through the air as if pulled by unseen hands. "This place really is haunted," one of the boys breathed. Dylan stared at the empty space before the cell. "Ivy?" he asked quietly. "Is that you?" The keys turned in the lock. "Yes," Ivy answered softly. The door creaked open. Dylan's breath hitched as Ivy rushed forward and wrapped her arms around him. To his friends, it looked like Dylan was hugging air, but they heard her sob, felt the urgency in her voice. "I was waiting for you," she said. "You didn't come. I went looking for you." Dylan held her tightly, eyes burning. "I'm here," he whispered. "I'm here." His friends stared in disbelief. "Who is Ivy?" one of them asked, his voice shaking. Dylan pulled back slightly and said, "She's the princess." The words hit them like thunder. "The princess?" Another whispered. "But she's dead. I'm alive," Ivy said firmly. "And we don't have time for questions." She turned toward the corridor, already listening for approaching footsteps. "You can ask me everything later," she continued. "Right now, we need to escape." The sleeping guards stirred faintly. Time was running out. And for the first time since Morvena took the throne, the prison beneath the palace was no longer silent. It was moving. The western corridor swallowed them in silence. Torchlight barely touched the stone walls as Dylan led the way, his steps cautious, his hand never far from his sword. His two friends followed closely behind, their shoulders tense, eyes flicking nervously toward every shadow. This part of the palace was avoided by servants and guards alike. Fear clung to it like damp air. "This place," one of them muttered under his breath. "So this is where the ghost lives," Ivy opened the door to the small chamber. The hinges creaked as always, sharp and loud in the quiet corridor. Both young soldiers flinched instinctively, then hurried inside. The door shut behind them, sealing the room away from the rest of the palace. "You're safe here," Ivy said calmly. "No one comes to this place." "That's true," Dylan added. "People are terrified of it." One of his friends forced a weak laugh. "So you're the ghost everyone's been talking about?" "Not a ghost," Ivy replied gently. "Just unseen." The chamber felt different, now crowded, tense, alive. Crates served as seats, and the men sat close, listening for any sound outside. Only when the corridor remained quiet did Ivy speak again. "Tell me why you were imprisoned," she said softly. Dylan exchanged a glance with his friends before answering. "The queen ordered us to burn a village," he said. "They couldn't pay her taxes. There were families there. Children, we refused," one of the others added bitterly. "That was all it took." She called it treason. Ivy's hands curled into fists. "So many lives," she whispered. "And she calls it rule." A heavy silence followed. "We should escape," one of the boys said at last. "Leave the palace while we still can." Dylan shook his head. "Running won't change anything." Ivy stepped forward, her voice steady despite the storm inside her chest. "We are not escaping," she said. "We are taking the kingdom back." All eyes turned toward the sound of her voice. "Everyone already knows Morvena is wicked," Ivy continued. "That is not what we need to prove. What keeps the people silent is fear." She let that sink in. She has made them believe they are alone. That standing up means dying alone. Her tone grew stronger. "So the plan is this. We remove the fear." Dylan leaned forward. "How?" "We bring the people together," Ivy said. "Villagers, workers, servants, and guards. The guards must stand with us." One of the boys frowned. "Morvena's magic. She will not see me," Ivy said calmly. "And when the people rise together, I will be there. Invisible." She drew a breath. "If Morvena casts a spell against them, I will cast a protection shield over the people. Her magic will not touch them." Hope stirred in the room. "We will tell the people the truth," Ivy continued, "that the princess is alive, and I stand with them." Dylan's eyes shone. "You'll be their hope," Ivy nodded. "When fear breaks," she said, "her rule breaks with it." The chamber fell quiet, not with dread, but with resolve. For the first time since Morvena claimed the throne, a future without her felt possible. And in the darkest corner of the palace, beneath stone and rumor, the fall of a queen had begun. After the night in the chamber, Dylan and his friends could no longer move freely. Morvena's soldiers searched the palace and the streets, calling their names, posting warnings, promising punishment to anyone who hid them. To be seen was to be captured. To be captured was to disappear, so they stayed in the shadows. Princess Ivy led them. She knew the palace as one knows their own heartbeat, every passage, every hidden stair, every forgotten corridor. Beyond the palace walls, she knew the kingdom just as well. Old paths through markets, narrow alleys behind homes, secret routes servants once used before fear closed them off. Wherever guards stood watch, Ivy guided them around. Wherever danger waited, she felt it before it arrived. Invisible, silent, unstoppable, they began with those they trusted, friends, former guards, workers who had suffered under Morvena's rule. Quietly, carefully, they told them the plan. They told them that the princess was alive, that she stood with them, that they were not alone. The whispers spread from house to house, from market to market, from guard to guard. Hope returned to the kingdom like breath to drowning lungs. Some were afraid. "We haven't seen the princess," they whispered. "What if it's not true?" Dylan stood before them and said, "Have faith, she is with us. Even when you cannot see her, and they believed him. Because fear had ruled them long enough, soon the kingdom was ready. They gathered, not as an angry mob, but as a united people. Guards lowered their weapons. Workers stood shoulder to shoulder with soldiers. Villagers filled the palace grounds, their fear trembling but breaking. Together, they marched to the palace to confront Morvena. The queen stormed into the great hall, her face twisted with rage as she saw them. "Fools!" she screamed. "You dare rise against me?" Dark magic surged from her hands, black and violent, aimed at the crowd. People flinched, but the spell dissolved in the air. Nothing happened. A shimmering force spread across the hall land beyond it, through the streets, through the kingdom itself. Ivy's protection spell had already been cast. Morvena's eyes widened. "What have you done?" she demanded, her voice shaking. She tried again. Nothing. Her power failed her. Confusion twisted her face. "My magic. Why is it not working?" Then a calm voice filled the hall. "You cannot use your powers in this kingdom again." Gasps rippled through the crowd. "Who said that?" someone cried. "Where is she?" Ivy spoke again, steady and clear. "I am Princess Ivy of Aurelion." The people turned in every direction. "Searching," she continued, her voice carrying strength and truth. "My mother cast an invisibility spell on me the night Morvena invaded this palace. I have lived unseen for years, watching, learning, and preparing." Silence fell. "I have seen your suffering," Ivy said. "I have learned how to stop her. And today it ends." She turned her words toward Morvena. "Your wicked days are over. The people want freedom and peace, and they shall have it." As the rightful heir to the throne, Ivy delivered her judgment. "Morvena, I banish you to the forest of death. You will never return to this kingdom. Your magic will never work here again." The guards stepped forward. Guards who once served Morvena, but now stood with the people. They seized her. Morvena screamed in fury and disbelief as she was dragged away, her power broken, her reign ended. And though the princess could not yet be seen, the kingdom felt her presence everywhere. Hope had a voice, and Aurelion was free. The palace courtyard was filled with people. Villagers stood shoulder to shoulder with guards. Workers who once bowed their heads now lifted their faces to the sky. The air felt lighter, as if the kingdom itself was breathing again after years of fear. Dylan turned slightly toward the empty space beside him and smiled. "We did it," he said softly. "We really did it." Ivy smiled too, her voice bright with relief and joy. "We did it," she replied. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. Dylan hugged her back without hesitation, holding her close. To the people watching, it looked like he was embracing the air, and they laughed gently. Amused and amazed, already familiar with the mystery of their unseen princess. Dylan slowly pulled back from the hug. He lifted his hands carefully, then rested his forehead against hers. He closed his eyes, breathing steadily, trusting what he could feel even if he could not see. Then he kissed her. A huge gasp swept through the crowd. Light shimmered in the air, soft and glowing, like dawn breaking through mist. Magic stirred, gentle, warm, final. When Dylan opened his eyes, Ivy was standing right in front of him. Visible, real. He froze, tears filling his eyes as he took her in for the first time. "Wow," he whispered. "You look beautiful." Ivy stared down at her hands. She could see them, her fingers, her skin. Her tears as they fell. The spell was broken. She looked up at him, her voice trembling with hope and disbelief. "Can you see me?" "Yes," Dylan replied, pulling her into his arms again, laughing through his tears. "Yes, I can," the courtyard erupted. "Clap in!" Cheers! Joyful cries. People laughed and wept openly as they witnessed the miracle before them, the invisible princess finally seen. That day, the kingdom celebrated like never before. Music filled the streets. Lanterns lit the night. fear was replaced with laughter, and sorrow gave way to hope. Weeks later, under clear skies and smiling faces, Ivy and Dylan were married. Princess Ivy was crowned Queen of Aurelion, and Dylan stood proudly beside her as Prince Consort. Together, they ruled with kindness, wisdom, and compassion, never forgetting the years of darkness, and never taking the light for granted. And so, the kingdom thrived again, led by a queen who had once been invisible, but whose courage had always been seen. The end. Thanks for watching. If you're new to my channel, please subscribe, like, and leave a comment. And to my returning subscribers, I love you.